All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming out today. My name is Kyle Empringham. I'm a client success manager here at Thoughtexchange, and I'm really excited to have you as a part of this conversation about changing your school calendar. And I think it's really important to actually start this conversation by talking about what's been going on lately. And I'll read a little bit of an excerpt that I've slightly massaged from the Kansas City Star here. Nearly every school district on the Missouri side of Kansas City area will have to start the year a week later than usual under a new state law taking effect in 2020. This bill requires districts to schedule the first day of school no earlier than 14 days before the first Monday in September. If the law had taken effect this year, that would mean August 19th. Almost every Missouri district in the area, with one exception, starts the week before. Now, school leaders, teachers, and some parents say that could pose scheduling problems next year as districts grapple with how to make up the time. And although, this certainly will be impacting many places in Missouri, we also know that calendar changes, they happen all across the country. And that engaging your community is essential to building trust and buy-in during times of change. And that's really why we wanted to host this discussion. Although changes are inevitable, how do you help your community understand the facts? And how do you invite them into an inclusive process where they can feel heard? And that's also why we brought in two wonderful women that work in Missouri school districts. We're excited to introduce you to these public relations professionals. They've been thinking creatively about calendar changes, and they have some words of wisdom to impart here. And so here's how this will work. I'm going to introduce these two to you, and we'll have a quick conversation about how to move forward with changing your school calendar. After that, I'm actually going to show you how to build out an exchange, and we're going to ask you all to participate in that conversation. We'll spend the last 15 minutes or so going through the top thoughts with Annie and Erica and responding to the things that are rising to the top, the things that we want to talk about most. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our two panelists for today. The first is Erica Chandler. She's the Director of Communications for Afton School District in St. Louis, Missouri. With over 20 years of experience in public relations and communications, she began her career in concert and entertainment marketing before making the shift to school PR 8 years ago. She's the Secretary and Social Media Chair for the Missouri School Public Relations Association, also known as MOSPRA, and has presented at numerous regional, state, and national conferences. Erica, hold on a second on my end. Erica is a band wife and also mom to the hashtag Brothers Chandler. We also have Annie Dickerson on the line as well. As the Director of Communications for Parkway Schools in St. Louis County, Missouri, Annie Dickerson manages the Communications and Community Relations team. Her primary role is strategy and content creation for internal and external audiences. When she's not managing a crisis or telling a story, she gets to be a mom to Abby, who's 13 and thinks she's really cool these days, and Ellie, who is sweet and 7, but can't sleep because she's wondering about things like if angels fly higher than birds. Annie and Erica, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And just before we begin and get into the conversation, we'd love you to join in as well. Of course, we will be running an exchange, so you will get to sort of provide your thoughts and questions about the topic matter. But also there's Twitter, of course, and so you can use the hashtag TE virtual events and hashtag TEVE as well. Great. Okay, so let's get into the conversation. And the way I want to actually start this off is to get to know Erica and Annie a little bit better. And so I've told them that I've prepared some this or that questions for them. This is our rapid fire round, just to see how, to learn a little bit more about these two. So Erica, I'm going to start with you.
All right.
Phone calls or text messaging?
Texts.
All right.
I will absolutely dodge your phone call.
While you're walking, do you prefer listening to music or do you prefer podcasts?
It depends. Like if I'm walking for exercise, I like music, but if it's like, or even if I'm just driving, I podcast the rest of the time.
Fantastic. When you put cups in the cupboard, do you put them right side up or upside down?
No, upside down. There's only one answer to that question.
Okay, I disagree. We'll talk about that one later. Sweaters or hoodies?
Sweaters.
Sweaters. And would you prefer an amusement park or a day at the beach?
Beach, 100%.
Fantastic.
As long as there's sunscreen and an umbrella.
Right. Yes, of course, of course. Annie, you're up next. Do you prefer Netflix or YouTube?
Netflix all day.
Netflix,
Yeah.
All day. There we go.
Yeah.
When you drive, do you prefer to be a passenger or a driver?
It depends who's driving. I like to drive my own car,
Okay.
ideally. Yes.
There you go. Fair enough. When you're at the movies, do you prefer candy or popcorn?
Milk duds, ideally. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they have the places with the drinks, the reclining chairs. So the drinks are nice too. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Do you prefer a paper book or an ebook?
Ebook, but paper book when I'm reading in front of my kids or at the beach.
There you go. And iOS or Android?
iOS.
There we go.
Android.
All right. Well,
that little guy scares me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for indulging me in that. And of course, now
That's
to this.
fun, Kyle.
Now to the subject matter at hand, the school calendar changes. And so really, we'll spend the next 10 minutes having a bit of a conversation amongst ourselves here. And maybe I'll start with you, Annie. And the big broad question I want to sort of start off with here, what are the most important things for school districts to consider as they go about a calendar change?
Yeah, so I think that's the $1 million question right now. We engage our community all the time when we're planning the calendar, and we have a process for doing that. This is a pretty big change. So I think for us, we're looking at honoring the process that we've always used. I mean, I think process is really important because, if you ask 10 people what they think about the calendar, you'll get 8 different answers. So making sure that people understand that there is a process and an opportunity for them to engage in that process. You can easily argue about which day should go where, but it's hard for people to argue as long as they know that they have an opportunity to engage. So I think considering feedback that you've had over the years, making sure that you're honoring that feedback and reminding people what they said, and reminding them the things that you're considering. And so we have, for example, like a sheet of family commitments that we honor, contractual commitments that we need to honor for our staff. And so we're always trying to remind people, these are the things that you've told us are important. And so we want to consider those.
Fantastic. Erica, I'll pose the same question to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100% with what Annie said. Although I think if you ask 10 people about a calendar, you're going to get 11 answers. Everyone is different, and then they're going to change their mind too. So what we're really trying to do, and I think everyone is in the same position, is how do you balance instructional time for students, professional learning time for your staff, and then the priorities of your families and communities, and all of that fit into one little box. And now our box is changing. So like Annie, we also have a process for creating a calendar, and we get feedback. Historically here, it's been mostly from staff, and we haven't asked our families as often as we probably should have. So with this change, we're actually currently, we have a survey out talking about very specific things, like for families and for staff at the same time. So like, how do you feel about going to school on Monday holidays like President's Day and Dr. Martin Luther King Day, things that we haven't looked at before, to try to see like, where's your priority? If we're starting later, do you still want to get out at Memorial Day? The answer is yes. There's a spoiler alert there. So how do we balance that? And then also honoring our students and their instructional time if one semester would be significantly shorter than another. So I think there's lots of things to consider, and it's interesting getting this feedback from them to put our calendar options together, and then we'll go back and close the loop and talk about the specific options with them too.
Fantastic. And Annie, is your process similar to Erica's, or do you see differences in what you guys do there at Parkway Schools?
Yeah, we have a similar process. We have a lot of districts have a calendar committee. It's definitely heavier on staff input. And that's partly because there are, a fair amount of, teacher contractual obligations that we need to honor. And so we do that piece, but then we also take it to our PTO leadership. And so we kind of use them initially as our parent feedback process. And so they like that because they get to kind of have the first parent look at the calendar. We do a calendar survey probably every other year. This year we're looking, I think we're going to do a thought exchange in the next couple of weeks with families, do it a little bit differently than we've done in the past.
And both of you mentioned a little bit about that there's historical sort of reference there. You've done calendar changes before. This isn't technically really a new thing for either of your districts. What sort of how do you remind people of the things that they've said? How do you bring that top of mind to folks so that when they do sort of give feedback on something now, they sort of understand the history and can bring that into the conversation?
Yeah, I think specifically with our calendar committee, we have a list of requirements and considerations every single time that talks about, per the negotiated agreement, we need to have this many professional learning days. And our board requires extra days, or I guess it's now hours now, for our staff and for our students than the state requires. So just reminding them that these are things we are obligated to meet that layer in on top of what our community is saying.
Yeah, similarly for us, we call it our calendar considerations document. And so it has bullet points for, this is how we honor family preferences. This is the family preferences are based on feedback that we've had in surveys, in the past. And this is how we honor teacher preferences and, contractual obligations. And so we're just constantly trying to remind people every time we push out, a new calendar or ask for feedback, we say, and as a reminder, here's how the things that we take into consideration when building the calendar. Because you always have new audiences too. You have new families, you have new kindergartners. And so people forget, that they gave you feedback last year and what they said. So we're always trying to remind them of that as well.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that we're hearing a lot is, well, just add some time to the day. It'll be fine. If you add 15 minutes, then it'll all work out and we can start later and end earlier. But I think there's a lot of consideration that goes, it seems like an easy answer, and that is so multifaceted and kind of a sticky topic after we're changing start times this year anyway, and living through that change. So it'll be interesting how this all turns out in 2021.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I was going to say there, Erica, I know you've worked on start times as well. So, and I know that they're certainly different, but sort of similar things as well, and wanted to see if there were any parallels between the start time work that you've done and the calendar work that you're aiming to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as our community, we have said that we prioritize not having middle school kids start school at 7:10 in the morning. But that still makes our high school start at 7:30, even with these new times. But it also pushes our last school, which is primary school, K through 2, to end at 3:45. And that really has been the rub. And it still continues to be the rub. That seems so late. I think it's pretty normal for most school districts with this change. It feels very late for them. So sure, we can add 10 or 15 minutes, but where's that going to go? Is it going to go on the beginning when we said we don't want kids starting early, or at the end when you already have people upset that it's ending so late? So there's going to have to be some magic that happens somewhere. We'll see where it ends up.
And we've talked about adding minutes too. And I think an important thing that our superintendent and our board have said is adding 15 minutes a day is not the same as adding a full day.
Sure.
You get the same, it equates to the same number of hours, but in terms of how deep you can go with instruction and time with kids, adding 15 minutes a day doesn't necessarily get you the same quality of learning experience as adding a full day. It'd be like saying, well, I'll just add 15 minutes, a day to my work day, but it doesn't necessarily get you, a full day of focused experience. So I don't know that we're going to ask that question as a potential option, but it might bubble up in the thought exchange. We'll see.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what's happening. We did not ask that specifically, but there are a lot of comments saying that's the solution.
Easy. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, and then maybe I'm pulling a thread here, but what it sounds like is that it's almost like you're doing like a participatory budgeting process, and just not with money, as you might say, but kind of with time, right? Trying to figure out, okay, here are all the considerations. There's all these amount of hours and minutes we need. There's professional development days, all this sort of stuff. We all need to work as a community to figure it out. And although there are parameters, it's really great to see that, you're engaging your community. You're trying to figure out what's going to work best for everyone in the situation to be able to move forward, whether that's parents dropping off their kids at school earlier or later, or if it's really about the quality of education that you get, depending on how many minutes in the day you're in the classroom. That's great.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think we also all need to realize that at the end of the day, we will never make everyone happy. We just won't. So we'll have to figure out what what is best for kids at the end of the day.
And I like your analogy about budgeting,
Yeah.
Kyle, because I think it really is about priorities. And to Erica's point, you know, we have to figure out what are the top priorities, and we still need to have a quality learning experience. And that may mean going to school, you know, for us, that's always meant going to school a little longer than what the state requires. And while everyone might love to get out by Memorial Day, and we might all love to start our summer vacations, then that's probably not what's best for our kids. And our community has historically supported having higher expectations for our kids. So we need to remind them maybe of those commitments too.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, thank you both for participating in that conversation and in starting and priming the pumps for the exchange that we're going to run. And so what we'll do here is I'm going to take a few moments, and I'm actually going to show everyone on today's webinar and a virtual event here how to actually run an exchange. And Annie and Erica are masters at this, so they also know this. I'm going to share my screen for a minute. And I say this sort of in a funny way, but don't blink, because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an exchange from scratch, and you're going to see that it'll be done in about 30 seconds or so. What I want to say is that, of course, I work here, so I know how to set up stuff really well in the software, but really it is as easy as clicking here and typing in a question. And I'm going to type in, what thoughts or questions do you have for Annie and Erica? Great. I'm going to hit save here. I'm going to flip this one switch, and boom, I'm launched. As you can see, there were a lot more buttons and things I could have pressed in there. And of course, if you have any questions about all those things, or even how to set up an exchange about a calendar change that you might be considering, know that we are going to have office hours right after this virtual event. So once this event closes, another one's going to open, and you'll be able to go in and talk to some of our engagement coaches who are absolute gurus in this stuff. And so know that, you know, all I'm doing here is I'm clicking through. I have a link. It's copied to my clipboard. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to actually put it in the chat window for everyone here. And so check the chat window in your Zoom. Right now there is an exchange there, and it's live. And so you can go through there. You can add your thoughts and questions. Please, you know, enter one thought and at least rate 5 or 10 thoughts that are in the exchange, just to make sure that we can see everything that people are thinking or feeling. And so anyone who's participated in an exchange, what you'll know is that sometimes the room goes silent, especially when you run an exchange live. And so I'm going to give a few moments. It's going to be silent space, and that's okay space, because you're all going to be sharing thoughts and rating the thoughts of other people. So we're going to come back in a couple of moments here, and we'll start addressing the top thoughts. Again, the link is in the chat there, and we'll come back in a few moments here. All right, that's great. We'll keep it open for a bit longer, so feel free to enter more thoughts and rate more thoughts as the conversation goes on if you would like. What we're going to do now is I'm in the Discover dashboard. This is a tool that all leaders who are licensed leaders with Thoughtexchange get access to. And as you can see on the side here, lots of different tools that you can use in order to understand how the conversation went. For today, we're just going to use the top thoughts, and we're going to go through these one by one. And Annie and Erica, we'll use this as a primer to sort of keep the conversation going. Great. So our first top thought at the moment here, this one's for Erica. How was Thoughtexchange used at Afton for your start time changes?
Everyone loves start time changes. Everyone's favorite topic, right next to calendars. So for us, we used Thoughtexchange a couple different ways in the last school year. So the first time we had a new superintendent last year, so we just did a weather report of what's going well in the district and where are opportunities for improvement. And from that came the idea that our start times, especially at the middle school, were too early. I think I mentioned they were 7:10. We had been hearing that before. That sort of confirmed that it was important to our community that we really look at start times. So from that thought exchange, we did a second thought exchange later in fall semester, specifically about start times, and asked people to tell us what are your concerns, and then also should they change. And taking those comments, we created some options for start time changes. I think we had 4 different options, one of which was do nothing and keep them the same. And we used a Google survey for people to tell us their preference. It was not a vote about popular majority wins. It was really tell us your preference on these 4 options, and then the board made a decision from there. So we had our board reading over 2,000 comments from parents and staff and students. We asked them as well because it affected their lives, to really the engine behind making the change happen. So I'm happy, Kyle, if you guys want to share my contact information later, if you want to contact me offline, I'm happy to share more specific on that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Erica. And I think that, the process sounds fairly similar to even like a calendar change as well. There's different scenarios that you might be entertaining or not be entertaining. And so that's always, depending on the way you're proceeding, it might, that rings similar for calendar changes too. Mm-hmm. Great. Next top thought here. Do your teachers/union have a say in the calendar? Ours do. Annie and Erica, maybe Annie first.
Yes, absolutely. So our calendar committee is actually, I would say, co-owned in terms of the process, and the committee is co-owned by our teachers union and our human resources department. And then we also have tons of other stakeholders on the committee, a lot of principals and teachers at different levels, and others, in the building, or buildings. But our teachers actually draft the first draft of the calendar. So,
yeah, we're very similar to Annie.
Great, fantastic. All right, next big question here. What do you foresee being the biggest challenge with this change? Annie, let's start with you.
So for us, I think the biggest challenge is going to be, we need to find about 8 days on the calendar so we initially would have started school mid-August like we normally do. So like this year, we're starting August 13th. Next year, we won't be able to start until August 24th. And so what we're looking at is we can't find 8 days in the first semester. And our community has historically said they want to have high school finals prior to winter break. And so for us, we're not finding the time. So we'll probably have to move high school finals after winter break, and then talk through the community with teachers and high school families about, how can we support them through that and what makes the most sense. So for example, we're looking at coming back from winter break and then letting kids have a week to review materials and study, and then doing finals mid-January. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge and the thing that will impact the community the most.
Yeah, so differently than Annie, their calendar for 2021 was already approved by the board. For our district, we paused because we first really thought this change was going to happen with the law. So we paused. We met with the calendar committee, but we decided we weren't going to draft options for 2021 yet until we saw what happened. So now we're taking the time to really talk through different options that we could include for 2021 with our families and staff now. But I think really the biggest challenge is managing expectations on all sides. Yeah, how to make everyone, we'll never make everyone happy, but how do we meet enough expectations that everyone can settle into the change.
That's great, thank you. My apologies for the background noise if you can hear it. Apparently I'm in trouble. All right. I was thinking about putting this together with the last one, but I think it has a little bit of a different flavor. I want to see if there's anything else that you would add about what pushback you think you might get when changing a calendar, as it says people sometimes dislike change. Erica, let's start with you.
Yeah, that's the truth. People really do dislike change until they live it and becomes the new norm. I think our greatest pushback, if it affects lives of parents who need childcare for their kids, if we're talking about adding minutes to the calendar, or even just a late start to try to gain some minutes during the year, I think that will be our biggest challenge, our greatest pushback is we have to keep that in mind, that we're not just affecting the lives of our staff and our students, it's our families as well.
Yeah, and Eric and I have actually already talked about this. I think that there will be a fair number of families who will like this change. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reality is that it creates a lot of challenges for making sure we get instructional time in. It's certainly a shift in the way that school, what summer looks like. in Missouri. But I expect in our community, we will have a fair number of people who say, I like this, as long as we can get them out of school, relatively close to Memorial Day. We've heard for years that people want to have they'll say, I want to have my summer back, and it didn't used to be this way. And so I think if we can make it, give them some more time in August and not take away, a ton of time around Memorial Day, I think a lot of people might actually like it.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. That's great. All right. Recognizing the time, I think we'll maybe, we'll have time for a couple more here. How much community input on the timing of breaks and holidays do people get in your district? Erica, let's start with you.
Well, currently for this change, they're getting a lot because we're asking them specifically on options, like how you need to prioritize. How important is it to have a week at spring break or 2 weeks around the winter holidays? And is your priority to be out before Memorial Day or by Memorial Day? And how does that affect pushing back into break time during the school year? So at this point, we're really asking a lot of our families and staff. So it'll be interesting to see how it all lands.
Yeah, I agree. It's really about priorities. So we typically in our calendar surveys ask a lot of questions about breaks and holidays and other time on, time off. But if you ask people what they want, do you want a long winter break? They'll say yes. Do you want a long fall break? Sure. Do you want to get out? So we have done a lot of questions around priorities to try to gauge that. And so we do that in every calendar survey or anytime we engage the community on the calendar.
That's great. And I know one thing that Annie and I have talked about as well is that there's almost a bit of a grace in the sense about the fact that this is legislation that's coming down, and so in a sense, it provides the framing for what the calendar can look like, and in that way, it also can provide an opportunity to just ask people, how can we support you during this time of change? And knowing that there's, again, it's priorities, things are going to shift. It probably isn't going to be perfect, as we said. You can't please anyone. So how do you support people? And maybe that's a part of the questioning that you pose to different groups of folks, just to help them understand, there's certainly changes coming. That part probably is inevitable, but there are things that, structures and supports that we can provide you, which I think is a great part here.
Yeah, I loved that question when Kyle and I talked about that, because it really gives people an opportunity to say, what haven't we thought about? Mm-hmm. How can we support you, but still understanding that there's not much that we have control over. So I love the question.
Fantastic. I know we have a lot more thoughts here, but we're also at time. And so I know Erica has offered to pass her contact information along. Annie, if you're okay with that, I'm seeing a head nod. So yes, we can do that as well. So if you do have more thoughts and questions, of course, do feel free. We will pass along that information so that everyone has it. The last thing I wanted to mention here is that we do, as I said, we do have office hours that are going to be starting right now. And so our engagement coach, Tila, she'll be having an office hour immediately after this event. So if you're like, ooh, I want to figure out how to do this now, I'm excited. There's a link in the chat there, and you can go there to participate in an office hour and get some one-on-one coaching with Tila there. I really want to thank you, Annie and Erica, for doing this. And when I asked you and being all in and being willing and able to have a conversation about calendar changes of all things. So I really appreciate that, and really, just very grateful for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Very welcome. We love calendars.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We're very excited to have you. Again, feel free to hop over to that office hour if that interests you. And thanks, and have a great day.